agriculture industry. I think if you kind of look at the entire scope of the economy, and if you see monopolization as systemic across the economy, I don't know if there is a sector that is more severely concentrated than agriculture. And we see that concentration manifest itself in abuse of consumers, in abuse of workers, in abuse of farmers and ranchers, and ultimately in abuse of the environment and our democratic systems across the board. So I think this is a really important moment to have this conversation. And I'm so grateful for Attorney General Ellison, for our panelists, and for Senior Advisor to Secretary of Vilsack, Andy Green, for joining us. We're going to start with Attorney General Keith Ellison. I've watched AG Ellison's career for many years. And I think for me, it's defined by his ability to see power, to see those who are unjustly deprived of power, and to courageously address concentrations of power. And that's something that is too unique in Washington sometimes. He was not afraid to fight Wall Street during the financial crisis as a member of the House Financial Services Committee. He was the founding member of the Antitrust Caucus before antitrust was a topic of conversation in Washington really at all. I think if memory serves, he was the first member of Congress to call for breaking up Facebook back in 2018 on another topic. So we should have listened to you then. We're on our way to doing that, I hope. And as Attorney General of Minnesota, he has stood up for everyday families, particularly in this sector, calling for more enforcement. And we are so delighted to be able to hear what he is doing, what he needs, and what his vision is for the agriculture sector. So I'm going to turn it over to him in just a moment. But I just want to say thank you to our panelists. I know you are taking time out of your day jobs, out of your work to spread this message, and you've been doing that. And hopefully, I think we have folks in Washington that are finally listening. There is now, I think, bipartisan support for a more aggressive approach to monopolization in agriculture that the Biden administration has laid out in their executive order, and we'll hear more about that. But hopefully the tide is turning. It is not a problem that is going to be fixed quickly, but we are optimistic that we are finally starting down that road. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Attorney General Keith Ellison. Thanks.
Sarah, let me say thank you for that generous introduction. Thank you to the American Economic Liberties Project, and thank you to the National Farmers Union and everybody who I'm so honored to be on the panel with today. I think it was maybe 2017 when the Secretary of Agriculture, Sonny Perdue, was in one of America's leading dairy states, Wisconsin, next door neighbor of us here in Minnesota. And he was speaking to a bunch of dairy farmers, and he said, you know what, you got to get big or you got to get out. And the only folks who are going to be able to survive are the ones who get bigger. Everybody else is going to be gobbled up and gone. And when I read that, that struck me as exactly the opposite of what the goals of antitrust law are. It shouldn't be you got to get big or get out. It should be we're trying to regulate the big, make sure that we have fair markets for the small, and that we have not only good prices, but we also have fair competitive markets where families can maintain their farms and ranches over the course of generations, where they can pay their workers a fair wage, and where we can have shared prosperity, not just prosperity for some. That struck me as odd, but something struck me as hopeful when I really began to see, we were able to establish a caucus in Congress on antitrust, and a number of members wanted to join. And now people like David Cicilline and Ro Khanna and others are really pushing the ball forward. They started out talking about, the big tech companies, and they absolutely need to be regulated. And the foreclosure crisis of 2008 showed us that the banks absolutely were, too big to fail means you're too big to exist. Those taught us some critical lessons, but really now we need to think about the ag sector. And in my view, if everyone in America is in the ag sector, because if you eat, you're in the ag sector. If you had a meal, then you better be worrying about egg. You may not have ever put on a pair of boots or fixed a fence or drove out in a pickup truck to drop off a salt lick. That may not be your life. You may not know anything about it. But if you sat down for dinner, you better think a farmer. And the bottom line is that so many of us are only one or two generations off the farm. My mom spent every day of her life until she was 22 years old, married my dad, on a farm in Louisiana. And, growing up there, it's not just that the farm that was in my family was a business. It was a way of life. And to think that some big monster company can just gobble up and take away, I find deeply, deeply offensive, not just economically, but also culturally. And I don't think we should forget about that. Truth be told, that that today is a good day, a very good day to recognize the importance of a historic piece of legislation that came together in 1921. The Packers and Stockyards Act is a critical piece of legislation designed from the beginning to make sure that concentration in livestock, poultry, and other areas did not destroy the competitiveness of markets and the opportunity for people to participate and make a living in the face of giant conglomerates. The bottom line is that we need real movement, and it can't just be a congressional movement. It can't just be a lawyers movement, and it can't just be folks who are presently directly participating in agriculture, because they're only about 3% of the population. We need a national movement that makes sure that we have a strong, robust, vibrant, competitive agricultural sector that has many, many actors, many, many players, that the people who make the food are respected, their dignity is protected, and that the big monster companies that try to take advantage of everybody are held in check and reduced. So we know the American meat supply faces an overwhelming concentration crisis. Historic consolidation in the industry has enabled dominant multinationals to squeeze farmers, ranchers, workers, and consumers in order to transfer record profits to themselves and shareholders. Corporate meatpackers abuse their market power, employing exploitive arrangements such as contract farming, price fixing, and unfair growing arrangements to extract and suck out an increasing untenable share of profit from livestock producers. In the past decade, farmers' share of cattle market profits dropped by 9%, even as meatpacking giants like Tyson Foods and JBS saw 34% and 66% increase in revenue over the same period. So as the big are getting bigger, the people who actually make the meat are getting less of a share, and that is wrong and unfair, something we have to come together to stop and reverse. We're seeing record numbers of small and family farmers losing their farms. As I mentioned in my introduction, this is not just an economic challenge, it is a cultural one. America is every American's 1 or 2 or 3 generations off the farm. Not every, but nearly all. Certainly in my case, and I bet people on this call it's true. And so we've got to protect not just the economy, but also the cultural aspects of this, to me, are very important. And the reduction and the concentration that we're seeing among small, medium-sized producers and the record losses we're seeing is not because small farmers or medium-sized farmers and ranchers are not good business people. They're extremely efficient. They know what they're doing. They have generations of know-how. They're up to date. They're technologically sound. No, the answer is because the decisions made by 4 companies who control 80% of the beef market and the public officials who are supposed to regulate it simply are not stepping up, and it's time to get them to. Let me give you an example. From 1995 to 2017, the federal government gave out $205 billion in farm subsidies. That's a lot of money. $205 billion is a lot of money anywhere. And to give it to farm subsidies, great. Absolutely. Maybe my cousin in Natchitoches Parish is going to be able to keep things going. Oh, wait a minute. Hold on. It depends on where the subsidies are going, right? 26% of that money went to 1% of the recipients, an average of 1.7 million per company. 77% went to 10% of the recipients. 3/4 to 10%. That don't seem like a equitable program. 50 people on the Forbes richest 400 receives farm subsidies. And you know who didn't get any? You know who got nothing? 62% of all farmers. Now that's not right. That is not right. We have because one thing you know, if you study market concentration in 2021, is that it's not just markets that are concentrated, it is our politics that are concentrated. Once you concentrate economic power, first thing you do is go rent yourself some members of Congress and hire up some lobbyists to get more of the same, to the disadvantage of people who are actually raising cattle. Meatpacking conglomerates have bullied and maneuvered and lobbied Washington into ever weaker workplace protections and food industry oversight, leaving our food supply chain vulnerable, cyber attacks, disasters, market concentrations. This summer, we saw drought running through Minnesota. It was particularly hard on some of the small producers, and that was a very, very disheartening thing to see. But they're tough and they're doing their best, but they need some help, just like the big guys get. Uncompetitive livestock markets compromise American health, safety, and food security. This was visible in the early months of the pandemic. Shutdowns and slowdowns at key meat packing plants can, in addition to threatening workers' health and livelihoods, damage markets for farmers and the availability and affordability of meat for consumers. The government must act because it has the power to act, and we need to make the demand. One of my great heroes of the past, a guy named Frederick Douglass, said, "Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will." And that stands true to this very moment. Multinational corporate meat packers can be broken up. The 100-year-old Packers and Stockyards Act was originally intended to protect poultry and hog farmers and cattle ranchers from unfair, deceptive, and monopolistic practices in the meat market. In order to reverse today's rampant consolidation, largely a result of a historic antitrust under-enforcement, a robust recommitment to these important protections for farmers and ranchers is critical. We on this Zoom call today are committed, and we need to get more people, win more people over to the cause. Here are some good ideas I think could make a difference. I think we might consider breaking up agribusiness monopolies in seeds, chicken, hog, and beef processing, and supermarkets. We need to support the executive order, and I just want to thank President Biden and Vice President Harris for issuing that executive order on competition. It's what we need. It's up to the moment. It's appropriate to the time, and it's a good thing. We need to tell a bigger story. And I want to support their efforts to address meat packing consolidation and promote competition in the industry. And I want to be clear. I'll confess that me and the president are in the same party, but what I'm saying is not a partisan statement. Honestly, I think we need to work hard to build a bipartisan coalition. I don't think that there's Republican monopoly or Democratic monopoly. It's just monopoly to the farmers trying to make a living. And we need to be there and build a coalition on both sides of the political aisle. And whoever won't step up and help, we need to expose them, quite frankly. Another idea, we need to hold the meat packing industry accountable by strengthening inspection, slowing the speed of lines, promulgating stronger occupational and safety standards, and raising the pay of inspectors. We need to restore the grain inspection, Packers and Stockyard Administration. We need to address consolidation through the Farm Bill, reform the checkoff program, eliminate exemptions in labor laws so that overtime, minimum wage, and right to collective action rules apply for farm workers. And we need to get states' attorney general all over this country who are more than willing to step up and be part of this fight. The administration and state AGs across political lines can be very powerful allies in the effort to institute true competition and shared prosperity in the agricultural sector. I can't think of a better time to start it now. And let me say to you, let's celebrate and draw inspiration from that critical piece of legislation passed about 100 years ago. The Meatpackers and Stockyards Act was a time when people, a lot like us, were facing the same problem that we are now. They did something about it. Time for us to step up and do the same. So thank you all for listening, but that's all for now.
Thank you so much, Attorney General. I think that just sets the tone perfectly. And we know that you are really under-resourced in the work that you are trying to do. Attorney generals have immense authority, theoretically, to address some of these problems, to work across party lines. You're close to your constituents and the people that you represent. And we need you all to be resourced as much as we can get, so you can do everything you can to push this fight forward. With that, I want to turn to JD Schulten. He's a senior advisor with Economic Liberties. He has been an incredible advocate for farmers and ranchers in his own right, and as a candidate for congressional office in Iowa. We're grateful to work with him on this, and I will let him introduce and moderate our excellent panel. Thanks, JD.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Attorney General, for those words, much needed. I'm very excited for this panel. I have three people I look up to immensely, and I would like to introduce them, but I would like to allow them to introduce themselves. So Mike Hallicrate, Sarah Lloyd, and Bill Bullard are all on this, and they all have a lot of experience in this area. So first, I'll start with Mike. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks, JD. I appreciate the opportunity to be on the call today, and especially after listening to Attorney General Ellison, I'm excited. He's got the perfect plan. All we need to do is implement it. I have some experience. In 1996, I was part of a group of cattle producers that used the Packers and Stockyards Act in a court case against IBP, the biggest meat packer of the day. Later became Tyson. But in the end, what we did is we basically weakened that great law that was, if left alone, would have done its job with some really, really bad precedent. You know, we won in front of the jury, 1.28 billion. And then the judge, a dereg Reagan appointee judge, reversed that case. We went all the way to the Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court says, no, it's not important. You know, this cattleman's case for fair markets isn't important. And rather than hear that case, they heard the Anna Nicole Smith Family Feud case, basically just giving the big meat packers the green light to really plunder and pillage. And that is exactly what's happened since 2004, when that case finally went to trial. So to hear Attorney General Ellison's comments earlier is just really encouraging to me. I'm hoping that at this time we can finally get somewhere with antitrust law enforcement.
Exactly. Sarah, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. It's great to be here. My name is Sarah Lloyd. I'm a dairy farmer. I farm with my husband. We're here in Wisconsin, and we're kind of a medium-sized farm by Wisconsin standards. We're milking about 450 cows. And you might say, well, I thought this was about beef. Why are they talking to a dairy farmer? So as a dairy farmer, I'm a beef farmer. We send our male calves into the market to be bought and then raised up for the beef market. When our milking cows are done with their milking life, the healthy animals go into the beef market. So I'm actively in the beef market. I went by my in-laws. We're three families on a farm together. And I looked at our settlement from this past week. We sent 7 bull calves to market and got a range of $45 to $128 for those animals. And, we spent a lot of time getting them colostrum, vaccinating them, keeping them real healthy so that they'll be really good animals into the market. And, that's actually a better price than we've been getting. There were some times in the past couple of years where the trucker was nice enough to zero out our negative balance because we didn't even get a price that covered the transportation. And I think that is really emblematic of what's going on here, is that we can't cover our cost of production. And that's what I'm asking for. Attorney General Ellison said, I want a fair shot in the market, and I'm not getting it. So we're a family. We've been dairy farming here, my husband's family, for over 100 years. And I don't know, what the next generation could do if we can't fix these markets and get rid of the monopoly power. So I'm glad to be here today. I'm glad this issue is being covered.
Yeah, and that's, I think, so much important to all of us, is that next generation. How do we pass this on to the next generation? Next up, Bill, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, JD. Bill Bullard with RCAF USA. It's the largest national trade association that exclusively represents the interests of cattle producers within the multi-segmented beef supply chain. And we've been fighting aggressively to reverse the decades of neglect, inattention, and denial that has all but destroyed the American cattle ranching industry as we know it today.
Exactly. So just so much of, again, I lean on reading and researching a lot of these three people. And so I think one area where we should really start with, and I should start off by saying, I just came from attending a funeral, so I'm not symbolically saying that farmers and ranchers are in a funeral, but if we don't change what's happening with this monopolies dictating everything, it will be a lot of our funerals. So and we ended up having the Packers and Stockyards Act. Now, what has happened? And I know Mike talked about it a little bit, but what do you see has really happened?
JD, who are you asking?
I'm sorry. I think I cut out a little bit there. Bill, go ahead. I would like for you to start.
Right. So we went through a paradigm shift just a little over a generation ago, back in 1980. And that paradigm shift was led by the U.S. Department of Agriculture that completely ignored the statutory mandate to strengthen the family farm system of agriculture. And instead, the USDA embarked on what's called the Great Consumer Welfare Experiment. They were willing to allow harms to be directed to cattle producers in the United States, so long as they came up with some theoretical consumer welfare benefit that would offset the harm to producers. And then they began to favor efficiencies in the marketplace, and they ignored the externality costs of those efficiencies, and they believed that they were to be achieved by largeness of scale. And then the Packers jumped in, and the first thing they did was they infiltrated all the cattle producer organizations so that they would blur the lines between what is a producer of livestock and what is producer of meat. Then they reconstituted all of our policy and legal and regulatory framework that defined how our industry operates. And then the government and the Packers got into partnership, and they concentrated the industry. They purged competition from the livestock markets themselves. They began dismantling our competitive infrastructure. They created market leverage for the Packers. And then they globalized the input supplies for the industry. And this magnified the adverse effects of the abusive market power of the Packer. And it stunted the domestic industry's opportunity to grow and expand. And essentially what it did is it enabled the Packers, the globalization enabled the Packers to exercise the leverage they gained through concentration to essentially destroy the industry as we know it today.
Yeah. Mike or Sarah, do you have anything to add to that?
JD, let me just say, excuse me, Sarah, let me just say what Bill, I think, summarized it extremely well. But when we globalized the market, I remember when I was boycotted by the big Packers and couldn't sell my cattle anymore in my 12,000 head feedlot. Secretary Glickman, when I asked him, why don't you enforce the P&S Act? He said, well, Mike, in this new global market, we need big companies that can do business globally. And so that basically says what the policy became. But what, like Bill was saying, they not only have destroyed our domestic market of cattle producers and supply, to the meat packers from our farms and ranches, but they've done it to foreigners as well. So when JBS in Brazil gets fined over $3 billion for bribing, government inspectors and government officials, they just take it out of the Brazilian producer's pocket within the next few weeks. They've got their money back. And so it's not just the US producers, it's producers all around the globe now that are being exploited by this monopoly power, by these multinational conglomerate big meat packing companies in partnership with big retail.
Yeah. Sarah, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say that the crush that's on the small and medium-sized farmers, ranchers, here in Wisconsin, we see the crush in the small and medium-scale processors, and right out onto even the small retailers, that as these firms and enterprises get more and more power, they crush the margins, and we're seeing a lot of exit all along the supply chain. And we saw with COVID, if people had not been paying attention before, they're paying attention now, because it doesn't lead to food security if we have a brittle system that's all tied up in these massive firms. And we saw failure in the supply chains, and now's the time to rebuild a diversified and distributed set of production, processing, retailing, because we need that. We need a safety net, and we can do it by laws that we have on the books. We can enforce Packers and Stockyard. We can make sure that the agencies and the enforcement has the right amount of staff that they can do that. And now is the time, now more than ever.
Exactly. I feel there's so much momentum with the executive order, with COVID. I think really put a spotlight on things. I guess the next question that I'm interested in hearing from you guys is about, what does a fair market look like? And then the other part is, what do we need to accomplish that? I would like to start with Mike first, if you don't mind.
Well, JD, I think I don't know that we can have a fair market with today's current concentration and consolidation problem. It's like we've often said, it's hard to have competition when you don't have competitors. And so we've got to do something with antitrust to literally break up the monopoly power. And at the same time, we've got to rebuild this local regional food system as Sarah just described. And in order to build that, we're going to have the protection of antitrust and stop the predatory practices of these big multinational corporations. And so we can't just wake up today and say we're going to have competition tomorrow, because there's no solution out there, single solution, or even 2 or 3 perhaps legislative items that can help us get that job done, because we simply don't have the competitors. And the current companies that are there now, it's really important to understand that they cooperate. They do not compete, and they haven't competed for many years. In the years that I've been in the cattle business, I started sensing there was a real problem in about 1988, and I was convinced by 1996 that this is not an industry that there's much future in for an independent business person that wasn't willing to become part of the problem in providing the captive supplies and those animals that the big meat packers are procuring outside of the competitive marketplace.
Yeah. Sarah, would you like to talk about what does a fair market potentially look like and what we can do to accomplish it?
Yeah, I mean, speaking as a small business person, as a dairy farmer that also is active in the beef markets, I mean, the main thing is I have to be able to cover my cost of production with a reasonable return so that I can keep the business going. We are 3 families. My in-laws are in their late 80s, early 90s, still actively involved in the business. And then my husband and his brother and his brother's family. And to try to support the 3 families, we need to be able to indicate the price that we need to cover our costs. I'm not asking for extravagance, I'm just asking for a reasonable price. And the other thing about these economies is that we want more farms, not fewer farms, because we are also supporting lots of other businesses around us, all the supply businesses, the service businesses. And so we have this web of an economy that's critical to our rural communities and to the vibrancy of our communities. So it's not just the straight economics. Right now, obviously, I can't push that price up through the supply chain because I met with the dominant forces from these monopolists and monopsonists. And so, like Mike said, we got to break these up. And then we also need to help support all the businesses and the infrastructure. Now, I see that there's been a lot of talk about food system resilience and infrastructure that's coming in to support this. And that's good. We need to do that simultaneously.
Yep. Bill, would you like to take a crack at this?
Yeah, I believe the producer has a chart to put up, and to describe what a competitive fair market will look like, it looks nothing like this. Can you see the chart now? Okay, so the chart shows 20 years of monthly data. The red line represents the price of cattle that the farmer and rancher receives. The blue part of the chart is the retail beef prices that consumers purchase at the grocery store. And you can see that there's a synchronous relationship between cattle prices and beef prices for the first half of that graph. Then suddenly cattle prices inexplicably collapsed, and yet retail prices continue to climb. And since 2017, so we've been going on for 7 years of a totally dysfunctional market. But what's happening today is we see retail beef prices increasing while cattle prices are decreasing. That is symptomatic of a totally broken marketplace. So what's happening here is consumers are being exploited by paying inflated prices for beef, while at the same time you have these conditions that have been described by Mike and Sarah in terms of cattle producers who are receiving depressed prices. This is a functionally broken marketplace, dysfunctional market. And so the solution, to make this a fair market, you have to do what was said. You have to have many sellers. That means we need millions of cattle producers, not just hundreds of thousands. And we need tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of feedlots scattered all across the United States. And then we need packing facilities that are located in close proximity to where the population is. And so what has happened in our industry, where we have concentrated, we have centralized, we have skeletonized the industry, we need to reverse all of that. And when we do, we'll recognize a fair market.
Thank you. And first of all, I again think so highly of all three of you. We're going to wrap up here with the panel. And I would just like to ask you guys, where can people find you and learn more if they want to learn more? So I'll start with Bill.
I would direct people to go to labelOurBeef.com, labelOurBeef.com, to learn how both consumers and producers can help to reverse this negative situation we're in.
Thank you. And Sarah?
Yeah, check out all the work that National Farmers Union is doing. I'm part of the Wisconsin Farmers Union. We've got a monopoly power thing on our website, Wisconsin Farmers Union, with some videos that have the farmer's voice. And I just also say, don't let them tell you that the consumers and the farmers should be in a fight. They always say, oh, but if farmers get more money, consumers will have to pay more. Look at that chart that Bill just put up. I mean, we need to be in this together.
Exactly. And Mike?
Hey, JD, what Bill Bowler just said about the consumers and the producers is exactly what John B. Kendrick said just previous to passing the Packers and Stockyards Act, the senator from Wyoming, talking about how the big meat packers stood between producers on one hand and consumers on the other. So that was really a good wrap up, I thought, of our panel. But I can be reached at Mike Callicrate, CALLICRATE.com. I've got a blog there, and you can also see what I'm doing as far as our cattle company and our meat company with Ranch Foods Direct as an alternative pathway to the consumer. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you for taking the time out for this, and thank you for all being leaders in this department. Next up, I want to personally thank also the National Farmers Union for co-hosting this event with us. And we have the Vice President of the National Farmers Union, Patty Edelberg. And so, Patty, take it away.
Thank you, JD. Good afternoon, and thank you all to all the panelists for their remarks today and for all the work that you guys do in the competition space. It's all very important to everybody. And thanks to everybody for listening today, for taking the time to join our celebration of the 100th anniversary of the Packers and Stockyards Act. My name is Patty Edelberg, and I currently serve as the Vice President of the National Farmers Union. It is truly an honor to take part of this event today on behalf of NFU. NFU is a grassroots organization that advocates on behalf of family farmers, ranchers, and rural communities. Founded in 1902, today NFU represents about 200,000 farm families across the country whose operations range in size, type, and production method. Our organization was started in part to help restore and enhance competition in agriculture. While there are many challenges that face our members, having a fair marketplace remains a central issue for Farmers Union and for the economy as a whole. Over the past few decades, livestock and poultry markets have become highly consolidated to the detriment of farmers, consumers, and workers. President Biden, through the executive order on promoting competition in the American economy, has made this point very clear, and has called on USDA and the antitrust enforcement agencies to address this problem. We are glad to see the administration moving forward with updated and strengthened Packers and Stockyards Act regulations to address abusive, deceptive, retaliatory, or discriminatory practices used by meatpackers and poultry companies against farmers. After all, the Packers and Stockyards Act of 1921 was a law meant to assure fair competition, safeguard farmers and ranchers, and protect consumers from the monopolistic practices of meat and poultry companies. Unfortunately, the PSA has been under-enforced, and congressional action to strengthen the law has yet to come to fruition. The PSA must be bolstered and vigorously enforced, and it is encouraging to see the efforts so far from the Biden administration. NFU's grassroots member-driven policy states that independent producers cannot succeed in the absence of protection from unfair anti-competitive practices. Additionally, our policy also specifically emphasizes that livestock producers should be protected from unfair competition and monopolistic practices by strengthening the Packers and Stockyards Act, and that they should have equal access to markets that do not discriminate against family farm livestock producers. For years, we've been hearing from so many different farmers who have had to deal with unfair treatment from these massive livestock companies. As pressure builds towards a more vertically integrated industry, poultry and livestock producers are pushed to take on huge debt burdens. For instance, poultry growers often must conform to the business model laid out by the integrators to build chicken houses on their own farms and depend on one-sided contracts in order to stay in business, and at the same time, keep making loan payments on their own farms. When poultry farmers speak out about how unfair these contracts are, they are often faced with retaliation from those poultry companies. This is just one example of the struggles our livestock producers face in light of an outdated law that isn't holding these corporations accountable. With the new set of Packers and Stockyards Act rulemakings coming up, we have the chance to remedy the situation. Updated and strengthened rules will help move us towards fair and more competitive markets for all livestock farmers. As we take this opportunity today to celebrate the 100-year anniversary of the PSA going into law, let's remind ourselves, and both our regulators and our legislators, of the much needed reforms we need to see to bring back competition and fairness to the livestock industry. I now have the pleasure of introducing Mr. Andy Green, who currently serves as the Senior Advisor for Open and Competitive Markets at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Mr. Green has been tremendously helpful in our efforts in the competition space. We look forward to hearing his remarks today on how the department is working to protect the family farm by opening up more local and regional markets and ensuring a much more level playing field for all. Mr. Andy Green, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Patty. I'm honored to offer remarks in honor of the 100-year tradition of Packers and Stockyards the work that you and the National Farmers Union and the American Economic Liberties Project are doing today with this panel and every day with the work you're doing. It's just so important. We all know that today's agricultural markets face significant problems related to fairness and competition. 50% of poultry growers have a choice of only one or two poultry companies to work with. 85% of beef processing is controlled by 4 companies. And open competitive markets where fair price discovery occurs is increasingly challenged, with only 2% of hogs and barely more than 20% of cattle traded on a cash negotiated basis. The pandemic brought home just how damaging this extraordinary level of concentration is for all of us. Swine growers couldn't dispose of their hogs. Poultry growers couldn't get bird placement. Cattle ranchers saw prices collapse by 30% or more. Couldn't move their livestock. USDA had to provide extraordinary levels of rescue support across agriculture. And now we see beef prices going up rapidly for working family consumers, while processing profits are claimed to be hitting record levels. Indeed, the National Economic Council has underscored that meat constitutes half of food at-home price increases since December 2020, with beef and pork leading the way at 14% and 12%. These problems of concentration and insufficient competition, unfortunately, they're not going away. We're seeing every day, or almost every day, cybersecurity attacks, risks of climate change, and the depletion of water resources across many of these significant aquifers. Labor shortages and much more are all magnified by the extraordinary levels of concentration and conflicts of interest in the marketplace. Clearly, the 40-year experiment of antitrust and lack of antitrust and market deregulation has finally come home to roost. Much like the 2008 financial crisis didn't happen overnight, these problems were years in the making. Wishing away conflicts of interest, relying on false economic assumptions, ignoring critical tools like the Packers Stockyards Act, and failing to invest in choice and competition. Today, the Biden-Harris administration is deploying every tool at our disposal to turn things around. The historic executive order on promoting competition in America's economy lays out 72 actions across the federal government and has important directives to the USDA to work with the Department of Justice, the Federal Trade Commission, the Patent and Trademark Office, and use every authority under at our disposal to restore competition and fairness to livestock and poultry markets, seeds and other input markets, retail food markets, and more. There's also the work of the executive order on America's supply chain that is looking at the significant agricultural and food security issues that arise from concentration, among other risks. We know that when markets are closed to competition, it's harder for farmers or ranchers and consumers to get fair prices. That's why, under Secretary Vilsack's leadership, USDA is also investing directly in competition. We've announced $500 million for new meat processing capacity, another $100 million for additional investment to address other capacity bottlenecks. We've announced millions of dollars to support expanded inspection services, and there's more on the way to transform our food system in favor of local and regional producers and local and regional markets that are distributed, diverse, and resilient. And of course, all of this occurs against a backdrop of historic investments by the Biden-Harris administration into both infrastructure and, we hope, into the success of working families. Let's not underestimate the role that these historic investments in everything from clean water to rural housing, affordable childcare, broadband, and more can play in supporting the success of new businesses, new market entrants, and rural communities more broadly. To succeed, these new market opportunities need a healthy market environment that requires sensible regulation, strong enforcement, and robust transparency. For example, we need to reinvigorate the protection against predatory practices in our wholesale and retail meat markets, or otherwise new market entrants barely have a hope of surviving. None of this will happen overnight, but we're taking active steps to move the ball forward as quickly as we can. USDA has already announced steps to promote competition and fair prices for consumers and for farmers. These include preparing new rules under the Packers and Stockyards Act to address poultry tournaments, unfair practices, and undue preferences, and address the harm to competition that has been a burden on enforcement overall. We've announced a new enforcement policy that presents a significant pivot from the 2020 undue preferences rule and highlights how we intend to enforce the Packers and Stockyards Act to the maximum extent possible. We've commenced a top to bottom review of existing rules on labeling with respect to the product of USA label, which is so important to ensure consumers are not confused in their purchases of meat at the grocery store. The impacts of that, we believe, will lead to new rules and improved processes that will redound to everyone's benefit, from consumers to producers. We've also already enhanced transparency in cattle markets through our market news service reports that provide additional transparency into the 80% of cattle traded through contractual arrangements outside of the cash negotiated market. And we're working closely with our partners, the Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission, to fully utilize the laws and regulations on the books and bring bad actors to account. There is a lot more to do to make these steps effective, but as far as I'm concerned, they're just the beginning. We have a lot to do to enhance access to retail, to improve price discovery and price fairness, to enhance transparency to producers and consumers, to promote competition in seeds and other inputs, and a lot more. And our fair and competitive markets laws, like the 100-year-old Packers and Stockyards law, will play a critical role in nearly all of these efforts. There's a lot more to be done. There's a lot to be done in general, and there's a lot more bipartisan interest and broader interest in anti-monopoly than there has been just about any other time in the recent memory. But there will be a lot of challenges, from courts to powerful special interests to any number of other political and frankly, in some cases, policy obstacles. We need your help. That's why we expect to see Packers and Stockyards rules arrive late this year, early next year, with the poultry rule and leading out of the gate, and likely the unfair practices and undue preferences close at its heels. We hope you'll be ready with comments and analysis. We'll need that to get through the rulemaking process. We also hope that you'll keep giving us insight into what's really happening on the ground and how we can help. We're going to have to be creative, and it's going to really require your help in informing us both on what's happening and on the opportunities to make a difference. All of this won't be easy, but fair and competitive markets will help build a food system that works for the American people above all. And that is fair, and one that is fair, equitable, competitive, transparent, and resilient. Thank you so much for having me today. I really appreciate all the work you're doing. I hope to be a partner in every way I possibly can. Don't hesitate to reach out. And happy birthday, 100 years to the Packers and Stockyards Act.
Thank you so much, Andy. I deeply appreciate everybody being on here, from Attorney General Ellison, Bill Bullard, Sarah Lloyd, Mike Callicrate, Vice President Edelberg. Thank you all so much. This is personal to me, and I'll tell you why. Because a few years ago, I decided to get politically active after my grandmother, who's my biggest inspiration in my life. The last thing she said to me is, "You got to take care of the farm." And unfortunately, she passed away, and I started getting active after that. And during my campaigns, I had a shirt that said, "America needs farmers, farmers need antitrust." And I talked to farmers who will always vote for me and ones who will never vote for me, and everywhere in between. And none of them pushed back on me when it came to antitrust, because they knew I was exactly right. And so as we all have this moment right now, this pivotal moment, this momentum, I mean, the executive order was good. It was the first time in my lifetime a president has talked about concentration, economic concentration in the economy. But we have to continue to push for this and for what our goals are really in fair market and all that goes with this. But here's why it's important. When it comes to the 100-year anniversary of the Packers and Stockyards Act, the member of Congress who introduced it was a gentleman named Gilbert Hogan, and he's from Northwood, Iowa. And Northwood, Iowa was where my grandma was born and where she taught for over 40 years as a 5th grade teacher. So for me, this comes full circle and is very personal. So for everyone who's on here, thank you so much. We need to talk more about this and with much have a lot more time to talk about this, but for this, I thank Economic Liberties Project for hosting, and I thank National Farmers Union for hosting, and everyone who are willing to take time to talk about this. So with that, just want to say thank you.